Good morning. Welcome to the program. In the meantime, I wanted to allow a couple of minutes for everybody to be able to get a chance to join in from wherever you might be watching. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we can expect to discuss today, as well as the beneficial conversations around human rights and crimes against humanity that we will discuss regarding the contested region of Kashmir. My name is Salaha. I am a communications coordinator at Justice for All Canada, which is a human rights agency an advocacy organization, nonprofit, non-governmental, and we are based out of Toronto. This event is being organized by our head office, of course, Justice for All in Chicago, as well as co-sponsored and co-organized by Just Peace Advocates, which is also a Canadian nonprofit human rights organization. And we do have a representative from Just Peace Advocates who will speak today, which we're very excited about. So I'm pleased to join you today as the MC of the program. I do want to thank all of our wonderful attendees from across North America and across the world for being able to commemorate and discuss Kashmir Solidarity Day 2021. Every year on February the 5th, human rights groups from all over the world, organizations as well as activists set up rallies, public meetings, as well as seminars to support the right to self-determination for the Kashmiri people. As human rights activists and as representatives of nonprofit organizations and NGO, we do peacefully affirm that Kashmiris have a right to their self-determination under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which has previously been applied to similar settlement international disputes around the world. So to help us maintain and understand the different parts of this very complex topic, I'm excited to introduce to you a really diverse and very wonderful group of expert panelists, as well as human rights advocates in their own right. And they will help us adopt a more multifaceted approach to unraveling this really long-standing territorial dispute in, of course, Kashmir. So without further ado, please help me welcome our first guest. I want to tell you a little bit about who she is. Henna Zubairi is the director of Justice for All's Washington, D.C. office. And of course, Justice for All, once again, is a human rights organization that's focused on stopping genocide of various persecuted ethnic minorities, such as the Rohingya, Uyghurs, Kashmiris, Sri Lankans, as well as more persecuted minorities around the world. She's a public speaker, a human rights activist, a writer, and she joins us with two previous roles in the news and media, as well as television production. So thank you so much for being here with us, Henna.
Assalamu alaikum and peace to all of you. Thank you so much, Saliha, for that wonderful introduction. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I would like to welcome everyone here on behalf of Justice for All, the Free Kashmir Action team, and all the wonderful leadership that our team has displayed in putting this panel together. Kashmir Solidarity Day. On this day, we renew our commitment to bring the issue of the Kashmiri people to the limelight and express support to the Kashmiri nation, to the just struggle of the Kashmiri people for their inalienable right to self-determination under the United Nations resolution. This is a commitment. This is a human rights issue. This is an international religious freedom issue. And we commemorate this day in solidarity. You will note that we do not have any Kashmiri speakers from the Kashmir Valley, from Srinagar, from occupied Kashmir. And there's a reason for this. They do not have a right to speak for their own selves. New restrictions have been implemented. It is so dangerous for them to just get on a Zoom conference and be able to speak about what is happening to them. Just recently, universities even now in India need government approval for any online international events in any of what India calls its internal matters. And these revised rules specially note that the applicable ministry is required to ensure that the subject matter for online event is not related to the security of state, border, Northeast states, Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, or any other issues that they call their internal matters. Well, we're here to say that Kashmir is not India's internal matter. It is a matter that concerns Kashmiri people. So I welcome all of the wonderful guests that we do have here who do enjoy the liberty to speak up and who are using their platforms to speak up for the Kashmiri people. In solidarity, Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Hina, for those really important words and those important reminders about the different privileges that we have depending on who we are and where we are. In the meantime, I'm very excited and I look forward to welcoming our next speaker, which will actually be a renowned Quran reciter. His name is Qari Khurshid Ali Alvi. Please allow a moment of observance to be able to listen to his melodic recitation of the Holy Quran.
Before Sister, we start the recitation of the Quran, and I will request Brother Wahid Mir to kindly bring two of our speakers, Ahmad bin Qasim and Muhammad Afzal Khan from UK, up to the panel, if you can do it, please. They are among the attendees.
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you. Jazakallah. Qari Sahib, you can start now.
I believe you are muted, Qari. If you can just unmute, please.
Qari Khurshid Sahib, we cannot hear you. Can you unmute yourself? Yes.
Right, nice again.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة إن الله مع الصابرين. ولا تقولوا لمن يقتل في سبيل الله أموات بل أحياء ولكن لا تشعرون. ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين الذين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون أولئك عليهم صلوات من ربهم ورحمة وأولئك هم المهتدون صدق الله العظيم.
MashaAllah, that was beautiful. I once again want to send our sincere gratitude to Qari Khurshid Ali Alvi for your time to bless the rest of this program with that melodic portion of the Quran that you had just shared with us. Thank you so much. Next, I'm extremely honored and humbled to introduce our next speaker. Today, we are humbly joined by a parliamentarian as well as a lawmaker from the United Kingdom. The Honourable MP Afzal Khan is a British Labour politician who is also the Member of Parliament for the Manchester Gorton constituency. MP Afzal recently served as a shadow minister for immigration, as well as a shadow foreign office minister. We commend his work, of course, on community cohesion, interfaith relations, as well as local government in England. Welcome to the program, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Would you like me to speak now?
Yes.
Please go ahead. Yes.
Thank you. And how much time would you like me to speak, please?
I mean, the floor is yours for however long you are available. I should definitely mention to our attendees and our viewers that you are a little bit on a schedule, and that's totally understandable. But between maybe 5 to 7 minutes is the time that we allotted the rest of our.
Excellent. I just wanted to get more than my share. So may I start by saying Assalamu alaikum to everyone and say how delighted I am to join you today in this global day of solidarity with the Kashmiri people. I'm sure most of us engaged in this event here would know that the suffering of the Kashmiri people is not new, but it's been going on for more than 70+ years. And what is sad is that the suffering is actually increasing by the day. And it's sad that one of the oldest unresolved dispute on the UN books is actually Kashmir. That progress actually is not being made. I think when we come and show solidarity with the Kashmiri people, then in that context, we have to then look at this challenge and ask ourselves, why is it that after so long of suffering that we still have not achieved that goal? Because ultimately, what is this goal? People think it's a complicated, but to me, I don't think it's complicated at all. In fact, there are many disputes in the world. And if you look at the Kashmir dispute, it's perhaps the only dispute where the resolution has already been agreed by all parties. So I don't understand why people think that this is difficult when the solution, you don't have to negotiate, but has actually been agreed. That is what the UN Security Councils are talking about. It's simply a plebiscite. It's simply a democratic process where the individuals who reside in the Kashmir, they make their mind up. So it's giving that choice. So in that context, I think some of the fundamental key points are there in this dispute. And that is that this dispute is about actually democracy. And the second thing, when you look at it, is with all the suffering that we talk about, then you see that this dispute is also about human rights, the abuse that is taking about, the violation that is taking place of those human rights. And then ultimately, because the fact that there are Security Council resolutions there, that means that it's also about international law. And we all know that if you do not respect the international law, then you end up with the law of jungle. And that, again, is not good for anyone. And finally, when any dispute is not resolved, when you see these abuses taking place, then when you focus on the issue of Kashmir, you realize how important actually it is for this dispute to be resolved in order to make sure that we have peace. Because with peace, always linked is the prosperity. And with this peace, what is danger is not simply what is happening with the Kashmiris. They have been suffering for so long. The danger with not having a peace in Kashmir is that we've seen this tension between China and India in Ladakh area. And then we've seen a number of wars and routinely violation of line of controls between India and Pakistan. And let me remind the world that India, Pakistan, and China are all three nuclear powers. They're also the three top 10 countries in the military hardware point of view as well. So the top 10 most powerful countries in the world, and three of them are actually head off against one another. So that is why the issue of peace is important in Kashmir. So I think then if I go further, and that then takes me to actually what is the problem? I think what you find is again and again, India is the problem. And when I say India, I think India is an amazing country. It's a beautiful country with a beautiful people. But the problem is the government. Successive governments actually have been abusing these fundamental values that we have. And these successive governments, and particularly this BJP government, which is driven by Hindutva ideology, which is an extreme form of ideology. We've seen this, what happened in the Second World War of extreme ideologies, fascist ideologies when they come into force, where they take the world. So we've seen that, and we can see this day by day, what is happening. We've seen what is happening in Kashmir, how they're violating all these rules and regulations, the international laws, the Security Council resolutions. But what we're also seeing is what is happening in India. Again, those of us who are here and will be familiar, we've seen this Sikh movement, the farmers movement, millions and millions of them marching, and we've seen the brutality that was dished out to them as well. You look at then what is happening with the Muslims who are hundreds of millions actually living in India. They're part of Indian society. The discrimination and violations, even the food that they eat, they can be lynched for it. Nowhere else in the world happens like this. And then you go to the Dalits who are part of the Hindu structure setup, how they have been persecuted. And then you go to the Christians, you see all that happening. And then you sort of step back and you can look at the wider context and you see how virtually with every single neighbor of India, there is disputes going on. So this is why I feel the idea of importance of peace is important in this dispute. And this is why I also feel that the world community actually cannot carry on behaving the way they have been behaving. They have to sit up and they need to understand the real danger that exists with this dispute, the very nuclear flashpoint that exists there. This is there, what is at stake. I do hope that with what is going on with the means we have now of communication and the awareness is increasing. That is one thing I'm clear about now, that despite the 70 years of oppression that has taken place, but what India has failed to do is to break the will of the Kashmiri people. They will fail because what the Kashmiri people are standing for is very fundamental in the human nature. We are born free. We have a right to choose. And it's this what they're denying. And this is why they will fail. And they need to understand this and the danger and the risk they're posing. So the rest of the world, particularly people like myself, who is a parliamentarian in the British Parliament, I feel there are a number of reasons why the British Parliament and the British government cannot keep themselves isolated from this dispute. So if you take them from the historical context, you realize that they were party to this. Some people argue that they have been instrumental in this dispute from the British Raj perspective. But then if you move further away, you find that they are permanent members of the UN, where the regulation simply requires the role of the permanent member is to maintain peace in the world. That's the number one point they have to do. So that again is responsibility. And then if you look at the Commonwealth aspect, then you see that these major countries who are all part of the Commonwealth, they're part of the Commonwealth family. The dispute exists within the family, and therefore they have to take. And finally, I would say why Britain needs to be more engaged in this is that there are millions of Kashmiri, Pakistani, and Indians who are British, who live in Britain, who are directly connected to this dispute. So they cannot sort of sit back. So I do hope, and with the work we are doing here in Britain and the Parliament, the APPG of Kashmir is getting stronger and stronger, so that this will move forward. The policy of the British government will be changed to the extent that they will actually do their best to make sure that we achieve this peace in Kashmir. And the new coming of American government, Joe Biden and the Vice President, all are on record actually. And I was heartened to hear the President's yesterday's speech about the value of democracy, the value of human rights, and how he wants to be engaged in Yemen in order to sort this issue diplomatically. That sort of same initiative needs to be now applied to India and Pakistan and in Kashmir so that this too dispute can be solved. Once again, may I take the opportunity to thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure joining you all. And I look forward to carrying on working with you, because working together with that solidarity, we will deliver the victory the Kashmiri people have been waiting for so many decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable MP Afzal Khan. Once again, thank you for your time and joining us today. I know it's a really busy day for you. And also, I wanted to personally thank you for your very sobering and grounding words and reminders around the current issue, as well as providing us a look at what how the international community is either involved or the lack thereof in terms of actions on their end to free the people of Kashmir and to provide them a little bit of justice as well as accountability. Unfortunately, I really wanted to take some time to introduce our next speaker. Of course, before he comes on, I'm honored as well as humbled to introduce you all to Mr. Javed Rathor, who is representing the Kashmir Solidarity Council. Javed Rathor, he is a real estate professional with over 15 years experience in the industry. He's also a human rights activist, which is what he's mostly known for, as well as a peace activist, a public speaker, as well as a writer. Javed Rathor is the founding chairman of the Kashmir Solidarity Council, which is an organization committed to collecting unified international support for allowing a free and fair referendum in the entirety of Jammu and Kashmir as a region. He joins us today as a former journalist, reporter, as well as an editor. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's an honor to have you. Sorry, I believe you're muted, Mr. Javed.
Yeah, thank you for generous introductions, and assalamu alaikum to everyone. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for Sound Vision for organizing this event on an important day. And secondly, as all of you know, the saga of Kashmir is so painful, full of miseries, agonies, that people of Kashmir are under subjugation for last 70 years, and they have been going through all kind of oppression and repression through invader occupied forces of India. Even they lost the lives of hundreds of thousands of their loved ones. They witnessed the rape of their brothers, their sisters, and wives and women, and they lost they have been blinds. Thousands of children of Kashmir have been blinded by pellet guns. But in spite of all these egregious conditions, people of Kashmir are fighting for their right for freedom, freedom with full passion and bravery. And we can't find any example like that. But irony is that international community have been forgotten about people of Kashmir. Why it happened? It's a big question which need to be answered by all of us. I think the major reason is there are political reasons, economic reasons, other geopolitical reasons. But the major reason which I wanted to point out and I wanted to emphasize today that this issue has been totally misconceived by international community. The reason it is misconceived because India portrayed and presented this issue in a particular way. India marinated this issue in the lies and deception and presented to the international community in the context of bilateral relation, that this is a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. When people perceive, when countries perceive an issue in a bilateral way, then they don't care much and they don't like to intervene in the relations and conflict of other countries. And then this issue lost the urgency of human rights and lost the urgency of fundamental right to self-determination. Here, I think it's very important, since we have on the panel Honorable Member of Parliament from England, Brother Afzal Khan, and Rashida Tlaib, Member of Congress from United States, and other distinguished speakers. I would like to reiterate that this is our obligation to present this issue in a true perspective. And what is true perspective? The true perspective is this issue is not a bilateral issue. This is not a unilateral issue of India or Pakistan. Even this is not a trilateral issue. Even this is not a regional issue, but it is an international issue. It is a global issue because it has global implications. It has global consequences. Why it is so? You know that India and Pakistan both gone to 4 wars, and they hardly escaped from another war just a year ago. They were at the brink of a war, and hardly they saved from the war because of restraint from Pakistan side. But other side, how the other side is acting, that's very important, and we have to understand that India is now ruled by a tyrant, by a fascist demagogue who came into a power with demagoguery, and he is followed by a group of homogeneous people around him, and he has a ferocious ardents. Those are supporting him all over the India. They are indoctrinated with the philosophy of RSS, which is not different than the philosophy of Nazis, as Brother Afzal Khan mentioned that. So keeping this situation, we have to think that this is a very grave situation over there. And if war happens between those countries, it can easily transform into a nuclear war, especially keeping in view the disparity of military might and resources between both countries. We can imagine, we can realize, but unfortunately, international community failed to comprehend the magnanimity of the situation. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, for the sake of people of Kashmir, for the sake of humanity, and for the sake of this world, we have to put this issue in true perspective, that this is a global issue. It needs global attention. It seeks global interference. It is not an issue of two countries. And I think everyone has to play a role, because it's related and it has a repercussion on the global situation. And I think everyone has to play a role. And
I just wanted to check in on your internet connection, Mr. Javed. I believe we had lost your video as well as your audio. If you wanted to try to connect back in. Okay, I believe we lost Mr. Javed. So what I want to do in the meantime is perhaps take a moment to introduce our next speaker. If we are fortunate enough to get Mr. Javed back onto the stream, I'm going to have him scheduled right after our next speaker. So without further ado, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our next speaker, who happens to be a youth guest today, one of our youngest guests on the panelist. I'm very honored to introduce to you Mr. Ahmed bin Qasim. Mr. Ahmed bin Qasim is a Kashmiri student as well as a human rights activist. He's a student of political as well as economic anthropology. He was born and raised in Srinagar in Indian-administered Kashmir. He also happens to be the son of renowned human rights activists, as well as, unfortunately, currently political prisoners, Dr. Qasim and Asiya Andrabi. He currently writes for TRT World. I'm very honored to listen to you, Mr. Ahmed. Thank you for being here with us today.
My audio visible?
Yes.
Okay. So today is 5th February, and everyone knows it is Kashmir Solidarity Day. And as a matter of coincidence, this happens to be the day when my father completes his 28 years of imprisonment in jail. And he was first arrested in 1993. And he was jailed alongside my mother and my brother, who was an infant at that time. And ever since that day, he has been in prison. He was released for a short period in 1999, but then again he was arrested. So I was born into this household of two people who were involved in anti-colonial resistance, and I grew up without my father. And as a child, it's very difficult for you to understand why your father is not at home and why you can't talk to him, why you can't have a normal life with your father being right beside you. But when you talk about Kashmir, the first thing that you have to understand is that the idea of what is normal and what is not normal is very different for Kashmiris. Like I've never seen my father outside prison, but then for us, what is more important is the cause, and what is more important is the reason for which he was detained. And he was not someone who was not detained, who was detained for no reason. He had actually taken part in the resistance movement, as had my mother, and both of them were detained for resisting occupation. Now, it's very natural for the occupiers to detain them because we don't expect the occupiers to guard land then for resistance. So it's been 4 years now since my mother has been in prison. It's been more than 27 years since my father has been in prison. But what is important for us to understand is that all these tales of injustices, all these tales of human rights violations do not happen in a vacuum. The people of Kashmir have been oppressed because they are fighting for a cause. And the human rights violations that are happening as a result of our freedom struggle. So we have to make this very important distinction, which is that the people of Kashmir do not ask for self-determination because there are human rights violations happening, but human rights violations are happening because they're asking for their right to self-determination. So, when my father was first detained, he was sentenced to 14 years of life imprisonment, and he was detained for his involvement in the resistance movement. And as soon as he completed 14 years in prison, then his sentence was stretched to 20 years. And then, when he completed his 20 years of imprisonment, then the Indian state bent its own law, and then this imprisonment was stretched to death. So this is something that we have to understand, that when we talk about laws and when we talk about system, there is no such thing as law in Kashmir. When you talk about law in Kashmir, it is pretty much a colonial tool. The only function that the Indian judiciary has served in Kashmir is that it has helped the Indian state buy time. They have jailed people, and they have jailed people under bogus charges, and then the Indian judiciary comes to their rescue. It decriminalizes what is essentially an illegal act. They jail people, and they have acts like Public Safety Act, which give these illegal detentions a legal outlook, a legal cover, a legal masquerade, and that's the only function that the Indian judiciary has served in Kashmir. So it's very important for us to understand that when you talk about Kashmir, there is no system or law that the people of Kashmir can count on. They don't have, there is no domestic legal infrastructure that they can expect justice from. The role of Indian judiciary in Kashmir has not been dispensation of justice. Rather, it has been perpetrating injustice and protecting those and giving impunity to those who commit injustices. This has been pretty much the role that the Indian judiciary has played for the last, I don't know, 70 years in Kashmir. Another important thing that we have to understand when we talk about Kashmir is that when you talk about the women of Kashmir, the Indian state for long has used a narrative of colonial feminism in order to justify its occupation of Kashmir. So, what is essentially done is that Kashmiri women are depicted and portrayed as helpless victims, and Islam is constructed, the image of Islam is constructed as an essentially patriarchal and misogynistic religion, and Kashmiri women are portrayed as victims of Islam and the Muslim society. So then the Indian state projects itself as a liberator, as a savior, and in the words of Gayatri Spivak, they try to save Kashmiri women, they claim saving Kashmiri women from Kashmiri Muslim men. So it's very important to therefore dispel this myth as well. I mean, it's very important to counter the justifications that are given by the occupier in order to rationalize or decriminalize its act of occupation. Another thing that I would want to clear is that I see this narrative that has been very commonplace ever since Kashmir has kind of catch some sense of limelight. People are talking about it. That this problem in Kashmir, this issue of Kashmir, did not start with the inception of Modi's regime. It did not start after Modi came into power. This has been going on since 1947. For the people of Kashmir, you ask them, they will tell you that they believe that Nehru must have been proud of Modi because Modi was able to do what Nehru tried to do, but he could not do it in 1947, which was ensuring that Kashmir is integrated into the Indian state and into the larger Indic culture. So it's very important for us to understand that when we talk about Kashmir, it's not a problem that started after Modi came into power. For the people of Kashmir, Indian National Congress is as evil as the BJP is. And when you talk about India, both in the Indian secular liberal imagination and in the Hindu fascist imagination, Kashmiris are the demons. They constitute the other, and they are killable people. The only difference that you will find in the approach of Indian National Congress and the BJP is that uh, for the BJP, the only good Kashmiri is a dead Kashmiri. Like there's no in between. The only good Kashmiri is a dead Kashmiri. But for the Indian National Congress, what the approach that they embody is kill the Kashmiri Muslim in him and save the man. So you have the BJP who has genocide as its policy, and then you have the Congress who has forced assimilation as its policy. And if Kashmiris were to resist this forced cultural imperialism and assimilation, then they would treat these Kashmiris just as the BJP does. So it's very important, therefore, for us to understand that when we talk about the hanging of Afzal Guru, it happened when Indian National Congress was in power. When you talk about the whole era of 90s, you don't have Modi ruling India or Kashmir at that time. Or when you talk about how this whole issue began, you have Nehru, who was the architect of this whole military occupation. So Modi has, and understandably so, because he is ruling India right now, and because his policies have been really belligerent and very and deeply oppressive, and that's understandable. But we have to understand that Kashmiris are not fighting for a regime change. Their issue is not with the BJP, but it is with the larger Indian state. And no matter what political party comes into power in Kashmir, this whole colonial project that they have orchestrated and maintained in Kashmir is going to go on. So we have to make sure that we don't kind of blame the BJP for everything uh, while constructing this idea that this whole thing has gone worse after Modi came into power. Kashmiris were never happy with Indian rule. We don't care what party comes into power. And for Kashmiris, I mean, we demand freedom from the Indian legislature. For us, the bullet that comes out of an Indian gun and the law that comes out of Indian judiciary or Indian constitution pretty much serve the same function. They're both there to oppress us. They're both there to suppress our aspirations of resistance, of freedom. So therefore, I feel it's very important to kind of take this into note as well. And finally, the thing that I would want to talk about is the case of political prisoners. Right now, you have 5 or 6 Kashmiri women who have been in prison for more than 3 years now. There's my mother, she's 60 years old, and she suffers from life-threatening diseases of asthma, arthritis, and many other life-threatening diseases. And naturally, in prison, we don't expect the Indian state to give them the health facilities that they require. And what worries us is that there's this fear that we feel and this sense of insecurity that we feel as a result of the actions of the Indian state. But then, even the inmates in jail, many of them are Hindu nationalists. Because let's remember that Modi was brought into power by the Indian masses, not once but twice. And in 2019, he won by a larger and a greater margin. So you have many Kashmiri women who are in prison. You have Asi Andrawi, you have Nahida Nasreen, who has been in prison for 4 or 3 years. You have Sohi Fahmida, who is a 29 or 30-year-old girl, and she's bedridden in prison at the moment. You have countless people who have been in prison for more than 14, 15, and 20 years, and nameless people. We don't even know who they are. And their whole life has been there in prison. It's as though they were born to be in prison. Like the only introduction that I had with my father was through letters and through books. That's how I know my father. So it's very important to remember all these people who have given ultimate sacrifices for the cause of freedom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Ahmed. I just wanted to quickly say that that is why it's so important to have the perspective of somebody local on the ground and someone that can give us that firsthand lived experience as to what's really going on, as opposed to what we might just be shown in the media every now and then. I really wish I could have listened to more of your personal story. We're a little bit limited on time, unfortunately. We are thankfully rejoined by Mr. Javed from the Kashmir Solidarity Council. He was previously dropped. I just wanted to welcome him back onto the screen. Just 2 minutes to conclude, if that's all right, Mr. Javed, just 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to draw attentions of all of participants on a very important issue, and that issue is India is not inflicting atrocities on people of Kashmir, but India waged a very offensive war against Kashmiris all over the world through deception, lies. As you know, that recently European lab investigation revealed that India has a 600 fake websites and network in 65 countries, only from UAE, only from EU, Eastern European countries. But in spite of that, in America, there are many followers of RSS and Modi's philosophy are working here, and they are finding ways around the member of Congress, senator, and in media. And I think we all have to keep an eye on those, and we have to protect people of Kashmir and essence of the freedom, as other young our friend told, that this is not only a Modi government, but this is a colonial mentality of India. They wanted to subjugate Kashmir. They wanted to annex Kashmir against the wishes of the people of Kashmir, which is totally irridiculous. And as Dr. Afzal Khan told earlier, Brother Afzal Khan, that Kashmir is accepted reality by United Nations and international community. And I think this is the obligation of international community. And we have to keep knocking the door of international community and member of Congress and think tanks and all opinion makers to support in favor of Kashmir. And I'll not take more time because I see there are other important people. They have to speak on the occasion. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much. I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you so much, Mr. Javed, for being able to conclude, and I really appreciate your time. I want to quickly jump to our next speaker. I'm also very honored and excited to introduce to everyone Dr. Imtiaz Khan, and let's talk a little bit more about his background. He is an internationally renowned immunologist with over 100 peer-reviewed manuscripts, as well as high-impact journals. He's also quite known over the last 10 years as being actively involved in the activities related to the struggle for the independence of Jammu and Kashmir from Indian occupation. He has spoken as an invited speaker at various events, embassies, consulates, and state capitals in support of this human rights issue. He has also served on the board of the Kashmir American Council since 2010, and he later became its president in 2014. He's currently, and he joins us as a board member of the World Kashmiri Association. Without further ado, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Imtiaz Khan. You can go ahead. I think we have you on screen now. Can you hear me, Dr. Imtiaz?
Can hear you fine. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation and for a very kind introduction. And I was really, and welcome to all the speakers. I was really delighted to see Ahmad bin Qasim, son of great Asya Andrabi, whose both his mother and father have done yeoman service to the cause of Kashmir. And basically, they are both still languishing in Indian jail. And actually, it was he gave a very right perspective about Kashmir, what is going on. Actually, that's what I wanted to hear. Actually, a lot of things which he said, I want to narrate it. And people are somewhat confused about this Kashmir issue. And I will touch upon it in a few minutes. Kashmir was a problem of 1947. And it is an unfinished task of the partition. And when Indian government landed its forces, and the issue came to the United Nations, and it was promised by United Nations that they will appoint a representative who will hold elections in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and they will be given three options, whether they want to accede to Pakistan or to India, or they want to become independent. But that election never happened. India extended its laws by and by, and then claimed that Kashmir is its integral part, which was not as promised. This was a Kashmir issue, is a betrayal from government of India by United Nations and for international community. Kashmir had its own prime minister. Kashmir had its own president. Kashmir had its own court. And the writ of Indian Supreme Court didn't extend to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. But by and by, India flouted its promise. They extended their own laws, and basically sort of Kashmir became a colony of India. In Kashmir, it is not that the movement started in 1990. There were people like Asya Andrabi or her husband or Shabir Shah and so on, who were fighting for the independence of Kashmir, who were trying to basically, they held peaceful demonstration to force India to fulfill its promise. But in 1990, the people became restive. They came out on roads, people like Yasin Malik, people like Shabir Shah, people like Asya Andrabi, people like Hamid Shafiq Bakshi, so on and so forth. It was a youth movement. And they took to the roads and demonstrated very actively to raise their voices against the Indian occupation. But what India did, it unleashed a brutal movement against the people. There were a lot of massacres. I need about 1 hour to narrate those massacres. Massacre of Gaukada, massacre in the Howell region, where thousands and thousands of people have been killed in cold blood. There have been 10, 15,000 women who have been raped, gang raped by Indian forces. One of them is Kuran Poshpora, about which a book has been written. There are mass graves in Kashmir, where people have been taken, shot, and then put en masse in the graves. This was not discovered by any Kashmiri or Pakistani, by an Indian origin professor in California, Angana Chatterjee. And when the Indian forces got whiff of it, basically they booted her out of the country. And what she describes is that this is tip of the iceberg. There are many, many graves, because we have also about 10 to 15,000 women who call themselves half widows because they don't know whether their husbands are alive or they have been killed. Now, till 2 years, the toll was that there is 130,000 youth ranging between the age of 15 and 30 have been massacred. It must be higher now because we have the data till 2 years before. There's a comprehensive report written by a famous human rights activist, Khurram Parvez. It's a 900-page report in which, to the best of his ability, all the cases of murders, rapes, and other human rights violations have been documented. We have presented this to United Nations, but the United Nations has not taken any action. Now we heard Mr. Afzal Khan, the parliamentarian from Britain. I'm thankful to him for espousing the Kashmiri cause, but sorry to say, he doesn't understand the reality of Kashmir issue. It is not as Modi came over. I agree with Mohammed bin Qasim. It is not as if Modi came, he started it. Like Ahmad said, 130,000 people, youth were killed during Congress regime. Mass graves were in Congress regime. Afzal Guru was hanged in Congress regime. And you cannot trust Indian courts. They are kangaroo courts. Like take the case of Afzal Guru. Supreme Court justice said, though there is not enough evidence to hang him, but will of the Indian people is that he should be hanged. This is how Indian courts function. We are talking about the system. There is no system in India. Especially, it has more increased when Modi came in power. They are talking about peace, but India doesn't understand the language of peace. When you talk to peace in India, it construes it as weakness. I will quote you an example. When Indian force attacked Balakot and Pakistan retaliated, and there was one Indian pilot who was captured. For the benefit of peace, he was handed over immediately to India. And what did India said? Because Pakistan is scared of us. These statements from the people talk about Biden presidency. But let me tell you, these statements from State Department or individual that India should respect peace, we appeal to them, will not work with India. India has to pay the consequences. There has to be action taken against Indian government like it was taken against Iraq or other countries. These appeals and other things fall on deaf ears. There have to be economic sanctions. India has to be made bled economically. So unless these things happen, we don't expect anything from Kashmir. It is a 73-year-old problem, and so many people have died. And just by saying we will remember Kashmiris on 5th of February or 13th of July or 13th of October, and that will solve the problem and ultimately peace will dawn in that region. That is not going to happen. We are being unrealistically optimistic. India has to be taken to International Court of Justice for violation of the rights of humanity. They have, like Mr. Rathor said, they have used pellet guns against the youth when they demonstrated against the murder of Burhan Wani. Hundreds and thousands of youth are rotting in Indian jail right now. They were arrested on 5th of August. Women have played a big role. They have joined the demonstrations. They have challenged the army people, come on, we won't shoot us, but we want you out. We won't end the Indian occupation. This is a human rights issue. But the primary reason for this human rights issue is that unless and until they enforce the right of self-determination, these human miseries will not come to end. And please, and please, and please, don't confuse it issue with the farmers, don't confuse it issue with the Dalits, don't confuse it with the other issues in India. When people say that, to be honest with you, as a Kashmiri, my whole family is there. Similar to Ahmed bin Qasim, I know what the ground reality is. Unless the pressure is put on India, unless it is represented to the international community that Kashmir is a boiling point. There are 3 nuclear powers, India, Pakistan, China. And God forbid, if there is some kind of a war, it will be a total disaster, not in the region, but will extend beyond that. And I have to go to the other webinar, and they are calling me. I'm sorry, thank you very much for your time. And thanks for giving me the opportunity.
I really wanted to thank you, Dr. Imtiaz, for your really important and moving words. I think that a lot of us, whoever we are, whether we're activists or not, many of us can feel very helpless towards this situation, not really knowing what to do because of such blockade and because of the inability to send our humanitarian assistance directly, which for a lot of countries we can do. We were supposed to follow up with a message from our founder, Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid, but we were having a little bit of issues with his video, unfortunately. We would like to try to table that for the end of the discussion. So I would just like to propose us moving forward to a message from from Karen Rodman of the Just Peace activists, if that's all right. And before we have Karen come on, as was originally planned, I would like to talk to you a little bit about Karen Rodman from a nonprofit organization called Just Peace Advocates. It's a Canadian NGO, as well as a co-sponsor and co-organizer, and it is based out of Toronto. So Karen Rodman is a human rights advocate as well as a spiritual director with over 30 years of executive, public, as well as program leadership. Karen is an ordained United Church minister and also the founder and executive director of Canadian International Rights, a nonprofit, as I mentioned, Just Peace Advocates. She has considerable experience providing leadership to establish vision and strategy to promote just peace through the rule of law and respect for human rights in Canada and around the world. Her organization is quite renowned for campaigning on behalf of the human rights of Kashmiris and similar people in territorial disputed areas, such as the Palestinians. Without further ado, I'm quite excited to welcome a fellow Canadian onto the panel, Karen. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for dealing with the issue of our lineup.
Thank you, Shukriya, and Assalamu alaikum. It is indeed an honor for Just Peace Advocates to work with Justice for All Canada on human rights work for the people of Kashmir, including on the webinar. And so I am really pleased today to be able to join with this very esteemed panel as we stand in solidarity with the people of Kashmir and their right to self-determination. I would be very remiss if we were to consider the brutal military occupation and outrageous colonial settlement of Kashmir by India to not also mention that we too are settlers on Indigenous land, a land that has been colonized through systemic historic violence and violence that continues today against the Indigenous people of Turtle Island. It is from that context that Just Peace Advocates comes as an ally and with resolve to work tirelessly for justice for all and the right to self-determination for all Indigenous people. I am pleased to join you today, remembering the visit that I made in late 2019 as part of a small human rights delegation from North America to Azad, Jammu and Kashmir. Now, a year into COVID world that visit in many ways seems like a lifetime ago. But more importantly, for the people of Kashmir, the unfolding of this past year is hard to even fathom. The people that we met in December 2019 were desperately holding on to slivers of hope, even at that time, with Indian-occupied Kashmir at 150 days of lockdown. Not one of the people that we talked to had been able to be in contact with their family members in Indian-occupied Kashmir since before the August 5th, 2019 lockdown and the revocation of Articles 370 and 35A. We were shocked when those in several camps we visited said that this was the very first time that they had had a visit from the international community in the 30 years since they were exiled from Indian-occupied Kashmir. Their message was clear. They wanted to return to their own land that was being occupied by India, their own Kashmiri land, and they wanted freedom through the right to self-determination to be realized through the plebiscite promised them by the 1948 United Nations Security Council resolution. In 1948, Canada's United Nations representative, Andrew McNaughton, had taken the lead in this resolution as a president of the United Nations Security Council. And so the people, perhaps having heard some sound bites of our Prime Minister Trudeau talking about human rights, so those people that we talked to held some hope that the Canadian government would take leadership role now more than 70 years later and insist India end the brutal lockdown and humanitarian crisis and help to hold the United Nations supervised plebiscite that had been promised to them. We, of course, were not that hopeful because we know that Canada's record on these things is not so strong, and that was came to witness when the United Nations Security Council bid for a seat did not happen this past year. But here we are a year later, and despite the work that has led to 3 separate petitions being sponsored by Canadian elected officials in 3 different political parties, and thousands, actually tens of thousands of letters to the Canadian government, the Canadian government still remains quite silent. However, there is, I guess, some hope in the fact that the presentation of these separate petitions was the first mention of India's occupation of Kashmir in the Canadian Parliament in over 15 years. The sliver of hope for the people of Kashmir, however, is getting very slim, as we've heard. In the last few months since India declared the domicile law, over 3.3 million domicile certificates have been issued by occupying India to its own settler population. It would be important that we continue to say clearly these are bogus. However, we also to say and know that the population transfer is prohibited under Article 49 of the 4th Geneva Convention. And to be clear that under Article 1, that Canada and other countries as high signatories to that convention are accountable to ensure the convention is upheld in all circumstances. Therefore, Canada and other signatories are complicit if they do not take action. India's immediate implementation of the domicile law has shifted the demographics in occupied Jammu and Kashmir within a few months to 1/4 non-Indigenous settlers. To put that in perspective, the settler colonial project of Israel in occupied Palestine has been more than 50 years, and about the same percentage change in demographics within the occupied West Bank of Palestine is less than 1 million settlers, but also about 1/4 non-Indigenous settlers in that area. So essentially what India has done in literally just a few months, really just mainly over this fall, has been make that same demographic shift that's been a half a century in the making in Palestine. Just Peace Advocates sees its role to stand with the Kashmiri community and to join with other allies to impress upon the government of Canada, but also civil society, the urgency of this matter. Kashmir is under a genocide alert. And of course, the situation in Kashmir, as we've heard and as we know, has crucial implications for all of us and global peace. With the new Biden administration, the people of Kashmir would look forward to the new president taking up the issue of grave human rights violations in Indian-occupied Kashmir. I'm sure we will be watching from north of the border to see if and what the new administration's resolve could be in addressing this issue. Silence is not an option. It is important that Kashmir is contextualized within broader conversations on settler colonialism, Islamophobia, racism, and the majorative nationalism that is sweeping India. The 21st century settler colonization is in hyperdrive for the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and for the people in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Just Peace Advocates continues to urge the Canadian government to engage in the dire situation, to condemn the government of India's domicile law and its settlement colonization, to insist upon compliance with international legal obligations as part of Canada's ongoing relationship with India, especially in trade, defense, counterterrorism, as well. We call for a proactive work at the United Nations towards implementation of self-determination for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. There's a letter writing campaign that we've just again started, and I believe we can probably put the link into the chat. I know there's more plans for Justice for All Canada, which Just Peace Advocates looks forward to also supporting. I remain thankful that I had the opportunity to meet with the people in Azad, Jammu, Kashmir, and that we can work together in support of the Kashmiri community and its friends here in Canada and elsewhere around the world. Shukriya and salam.
Shukriya and salam to you, Karen. Thank you so much for your important words and for sharing a little bit about your experience as well as background campaigning for Kashmiris. I know that you've done so much work, and I really wish that we could have treated our viewers to more information as to what you have been able to accomplish. So I do suggest everyone to log on to Justice or Just Peace Advocates, their website, as well as their Facebook page. Karen, please feel free to put in the URL in the chat for everyone to send their support your way. In the meantime, I wanted to let all of our viewers know that for this program, we had extended an invitation to a Canadian Member of Parliament named Salma Zahid, the Honourable MP Salma Zahid of Scarborough Centre. Despite the fact that she had wanted to attend the program and share a little bit about her views on the Kashmir issue, I believe she had a scheduling conflict. However, she has provided a message that I would like to read out loud to all of our viewers today. Of course, Salma Zahid is known by her constituents as a very supportive member of parliament, but she's also quite known for her commitment to human rights around the world as she defends them in Canadian Parliament. So the message that we received from the Honourable Salma is that she had mentioned that we share that Canada continues to closely follow the developments in Jammu and Kashmir, and that we are concerned about the risk of escalation, infringements on civil rights, and reports of detentions. And we are engaged in talking to our partners around the world about the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. We encourage meaningful discussions and consultations with affected communities, and we call on all parties to maintain peace and stability along the line of control and in the region. I really wanted to thank the Office of the Honourable Salma for providing us with this message. And of course, it's always quite encouraging and motivating to hear the words and the support from lawmakers, whether it's from the United States, as we'll later see in this program, or from Canada. And speaking of lawmakers in the United States, I wanted to introduce our next speaker, of course. I'm extremely excited to be joined here today by someone that we all know, whether you're in the United States or not, and that would be the amazing Congresswoman Rashida Harbi Tlaib. She is an American politician and a lawyer serving in the United States, and she is a US representative for Michigan's 13th Congressional District. In her community, Congresswoman Rashida is well known as a progressive warrior, as they call her, I believe a nickname for her. And in her own words, she is a mother working for justice for all. So I want to thank our backstage team, Mr. Wahid Mir, for helping us see Rashida here on the screen today. Just without further ado.
Salams, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. Thank you so much for inviting me to provide a message for Kashmir Solidarity Day. I'm incredibly grateful for all the advocacy you all are doing on behalf of Kashmir, but also for Black lives, for Uyghur Muslims, and for Palestine. Thank you for speaking that truth. It is so incredibly important as we try to seek freedom for everyone. I also know that Kashmir might not be in the headlines, but please know it is always going to be in our hearts and our minds. Since 2019, with the revocation of Section 370, the horrific images, the horrific actions by the Indian government is something that we are going to have to face, and we have to do it together to ensure that it will never repeat again. We know that it continues that form of oppression, not only again in Kashmir, but all around the country. But we are stronger when we come together and fight against those injustices. We have the truth on our side, and we always will, because every single child that is harmed will continue to speak that truth even years later as they try to pretend it never happened, and they will. And as a daughter of Palestinian immigrants, I see it happening to my ancestors, my family, every single day. It won't be erased. It will be at the center again of our work. So thank you all so much. And please know you will always have a fighter and a partner in the United States Congress. And again, I will continue to speak that truth and continue to uplift all of you with me. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
So it is extremely heartwarming to get the support of such people from different capacities of lawmaking and politicians. Of course, as you know, that was Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. Next, last but certainly not least, I would like to introduce everyone here to Abdul Malik Mujahid. Of course, Abdul Malik Mujahid is the founder and the president of Justice for All, which is our headquarters and the organization of this event, or organizer of this event rather. Abdul Malik Mujahid is the founding chairman of Sound Vision Foundation, and he is the leading producer of educational content on Islam and Muslims in North America. He himself is an American Muslim Imam, a producer, an author, as well as a non-profit entrepreneur. He's been selected 8 times as one of the world's top 500 most influential Muslims. Without further ado, please take a moment to listen to a few important words from our founder and president, Imam Malik Mujahid.
Assalamu alaikum. I hope you are all doing great. Peace be with you all. Azadi, Azadi is a slogan which comes from heart, which is part of humanity. It's the natural rights which is awarded to all human beings by God Almighty. Freedom, freedom. This is the call of Kashmiris, which you just heard. This is the most important demand, call, slogan, passion for which people have given tremendous sacrifices. And this is for all people, not just Kashmiris. Patrick Henry, among the founding fathers of America, says, "Give me liberty or give me death." His passionate plea for that in Virginia actually led to the American independence. Call for freedom is everywhere. He was a white man with slaves. His slaves heard that call and they ran away. They actually joined the British Army, which has declared that slaves will be given freedoms if they join. 20,000 of them joined. So did Patrick Henry's own slaves, because call for freedom cannot be suppressed. That's the nature of a human being. This is in the nature, what we call in Islam fitra. Freedom, liberty is a part of that. Call for freedom cannot be suppressed. Among those 20,000 people who joined British, because they declared them free or promised them that win or lose, they will be set free, 20,000 of them. One of them was named Abu Bakr, named after the first caliph of Islam after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He joined them. He became leader. He was from Louisiana, French Louisiana. He joined them, took part in their, when he was among those people who British honored their thing of slavery. But what they did was, instead of returning him back to Africa, him and other partners, they dropped them in Trinidad. And when he and his companions were dropped off there, slavery was still there in Trinidad, and they don't want to be slave. So he was African slave, a Muslim. He kept his Islam. So he ran away from Trinidad City port and went in the jungle, and he established a slave, a free colony. It is called Maroon colonies in Trinidad and that area. And he established his own village, and he was able to start a crop, coffee, and will transport. Actually, his letters are sitting in the British Library. He's asking Queen, telling them what British did to him and his people, and asking asking, I think it was a Queen or something, that at least he should build a bridge on the canal. I had the honor of going to Trinidad. I discovered that bridge, and I was allowed by Trinidad officers to excavate, and I excavated few things. And this is among the things which is printed, was developed in Louisiana, but as a, among the things they took with them was one of these things which I discovered while excavating there. It was difficult. I had my up to the knees, I was in a muck. I had need to be rescued and all that. So cry for freedom cannot be suppressed, whether it's a Patrick Henry or it is for Brother Abu Bakr, or the slaves of Patrick Henry who ran away and joined the British. Cry for freedom cannot be separate, no matter what it is. And you must have heard of Frederick Douglass. One scholar, his name is Michael Gomez. He actually believes that he was descendant of Muslims as well. And he's very famous for his cry for freedom. And but it does require stubborn. And Frederick Douglass says, the limit of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. So limit of freedom is defined by those people who are being oppressed, by their endurance, patience, persistence, and sabr. But call for freedom cannot be suppressed. Kashmiris, mashallah, have sabr and patience and wisdom. They're not going to give up. It is very evident. And that's why India has 1 million army there. And that's the reason they have kidnapped young people and killed them. And that's why there are half widows in Kashmir. There is actually an association of people who do not know what happened to their husbands. That's where there are thousands of unmarked graves. There are graveyards of people, unmarked, unknown. Who were those people? Maybe some of the husbands of those half widows who were buried there. And that's why they have children who will shout Azadi, Azadi, and their faces have nothing but those pallets, and eyesight is gone. No, Kashmiris are not suffering. Kashmiris are striving. They're striving for freedom. They're striving for justice. They're striving for their human rights. Call for freedom cannot be suppressed. That call will going on. That call has always been there in humanity. There was a person with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His name is Khubab ibn Arth, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. He was among the first 10 people who accepted Islam. He was a slave. He was purchased in a market by a lady. Shouldn't call her a lady because of the torture she did. And he became a master blacksmith. And when he heard Prophet Muhammad calling, liberating people from humanity, from slave of human being, and calling everyone to become servant of God Almighty and follow me so we can establish peace, justice in Arabia, he responded to call. That was call of freedom. Call for freedom cannot be suppressed. So he will be beaten up, he will be tortured. At one time, they have him this iron cast, they used to have sort of to protect against the sword. So it has sort of chain all around the body. Put him in there, and the hot sun put him out there and will not let him move because somebody will sit at the top of him. And they will put him on coal. Later on, he had a long life and good life. He went to Medina along with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, second caliph, at one time asked him about that. He actually showed up where he was, so he stood up. I said, nobody is as honored as him after Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Bilal was also a slave who will just say, when they will torture him, will say, Ahad, Ahad. That is the call of freedom, brothers and sisters. And he showed, Umar asked him, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, to show his back, and it was nothing but all his skin was white because of the torture he suffered. He's the one who once was sitting alone with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who asked him, who was resting. So Khubab ibn Arth thought it's a good time to talk to the Prophet. He said, Ya Rasulullah, why don't you pray against these people? In these mushrik and who don't believe in God, who are oppressing and torturing and all of that. That's where Prophet became animated, and it's a long hadith, but short is, by God, he gave example of people before them. Same struggle for freedom, justice, and Islam of earlier prophets. And then he said, by God, he refused to pray against those people. He said, by God, time will come. From one lady from Sana to Hadramaut will travel alone, old lady, travel alone, loaded with gold, and she have feared of none. That was the beautiful society of justice Prophet was imagining. And that was his vision. He achieved that vision. And Khubab ibn Arth, who was tortured so much, probably the first person or the second person to be tortured like that, striving for freedom, justice, and Islam. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم مستهم البأساء والضراء وزلزلوا حتى يقول الرسول والذين ما متى نصر الله. Ya Allah, when victory will come? Victory will come, inshallah. Requires sabr, wisdom, strategies, new strategies defining for freedom. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you, especially our brothers and sisters and young Muslims in Kashmir, striving for freedom, justice, and Islam.
Thank you so much, Imam Malik Mujahid, for that very emotional appeal for Kashmiris. And that being said, I wanted to quickly direct everyone's attention to your support, and you can easily lend your support after everything that we've heard. We know that campaigning and raising awareness and education campaigning especially does make a big difference in getting the word out there and actioning for change. So you can log on to justiceforall.org/free-Kashmir, and we will have that URL somewhere in our description to read more information, as well as sign a petition and participate in one of our many various action alerts. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us here today, and I'd like to throw it over to our Justice for All Washington, D.C. Director, Hina Zuberi, who will close our program today. If you can just go right ahead, Hannah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. So we're at the end of our program, and so I do not want to take much time. There are several action items that we are planning out and conducting this year with the new Congress coming in. I urge every American who is watching this to be in touch with if they have a new congressperson, to educate them on Kashmir. Please get in touch with us so we can help you set up meetings with them. Otherwise, do engage and call them. There's several action tools on our website that you can use. I would also, there's talk about taking India to the ICJ. All of this takes work, it takes testimony, and currently the Kashmiri people are being muzzled. So it is absolutely imperative to collect the stories of the prisoners who are imprisoned right now, especially religious freedom prisoners, prisoners of conscience, political prisoners. It is imperative to document this and collect this as we head towards taking India to international courts. We do not have much time. We really want to end this program at the 1:30 mark. So I'm going to hand it over to our Kashmir team lead, Imam Abdul, who can end with a dua. And please do follow us on www.justiceforall.org and Justice for All Canada, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So before concluding the proceedings of Kashmir Solidarity Day, I will say that I'm personally indebted to all the speakers, Qari Khurshid Ali Alvi, Ahmed bin Qasim, Javed Rathor, Dr. Imtiaz Khan, Muhammad Afzal Khan from UK, and Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, and Karen for giving time for this important day. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and reward you greatly. So I will make a brief dua because we are short of time. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasuli Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we very humbly implore your mercy. Please take mercy on the plight of people of Kashmir. Don't test them anymore. They have already been tested terribly. They have been tortured, butchered, persecuted for the last 70 years. Their children have been killed. Women have been molested. Their children and husbands have been forcibly made to disappear. Old people have been brutalized in front of their families. They are calling you, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are begging you. They are asking you, Mata Nasrullah, when your help is coming. And they are waiting for your response. Allah inna nasrullahi qareeb. Rabbana afriq alayna sabran wa thabbit aqdamana wansurna ala al-qawmil kafirin wa tawaffana muslimin. Allahumma ighfir lil muslimin al-kashmirin wal muslimat al-ahya'i minhum wal amwat innaka ghafirun mujibud da'wat ya hayyu ya qayyum bi rahmatika nastaghith. Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, accept their sacrifices of 100,000 people who have laid down their lives, their contribution, their services for the sake of freedom. Ya Allah Azza wa Jal, grant them freedom. Let them enjoy the freedom as we are enjoying the freedom, as other world is enjoying the freedom. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين.